I never thought I'd be telling this story. At 52, I believed I had my life mapped out, understood the terrain of my heart, knew where all the buried landmines lay dormant. But life has a way of detonating explosions in the most unexpected places, and sometimes those explosions reveal truths we never saw coming. My name is David Mitchell, and for 23 years I thought I knew everything about love, marriage, and the woman who shared my bed. I was wrong about all of it. The morning it all began to unravel started like any other Tuesday in our suburban Chicago home. Margaret was at the kitchen counter, her auburn hair catching the early light streaming through our bay window, stirring her coffee with that methodical precision that had both charmed and occasionally irritated me throughout our marriage. She wore her blue silk robe, the one I'd bought her for our 20th anniversary, and she was humming something I couldn't identify. "Sleep well?" I asked, kissing the top of her head as I reached for my travel mug. "Like a baby," she replied, but there was something different in her voice, a lightness I hadn't heard in years, a sparkle that seemed to emanate from somewhere deep inside her, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a long storm. I should have paid attention to that sparkle. I should have recognized it as the beginning of everything I thought I knew coming apart at the seams. Margaret had always been beautiful, but that morning she seemed to glow with an inner radiance that made me pause. At 49, she possessed a timeless elegance that had only deepened with age. Her green eyes held secrets I'd thought I'd unlocked years ago, and her smile carried mysteries that suddenly felt foreign to me. "I'm meeting Jennifer for lunch today," she said casually, not looking up from her coffee. "You remember Jennifer, don't you, from my book club?" I nodded absently, already mentally reviewing my schedule for the day. Jennifer was a recent addition to Margaret's social circle, someone she'd met at their monthly literary discussions. Margaret had mentioned her a few times over the past several months, always with that same inexplicable brightness in her voice. "Have fun," I said, gathering my briefcase and laptop bag. "I'll probably be late tonight. The Henderson account is demanding another round of revisions." Margaret looked up then, and for a moment, I caught something in her expression that I couldn't quite identify. It wasn't sadness exactly, but rather a kind of gentle pity, as if she were looking at someone who didn't yet understand what was happening to him. "David," she said softly, "we should talk when you get home." The words hung in the air between us like a premonition. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I pushed it away. After 23 years of marriage, there had been many conversations that began with, "We should talk," and we'd weathered them all. This would be no different. "Of course," I replied, kissing her cheek. "Everything okay?" She smiled, but it was a smile I'd never seen before, sad and hopeful and terrifying all at once. "Everything's going to be fine, David. I promise." I left for work with those words echoing in my mind, never imagining that by evening, my entire world would have shifted on its axis. The advertising agency where I worked as a senior creative director buzzed with its usual controlled chaos. Phones rang constantly, keyboards clattered, and the coffee machine worked overtime, fueling the creative minds that crafted campaigns for everything from luxury cars to breakfast cereals. I'd been there for 15 years, climbing the ladder from junior copywriter to my current position, finding satisfaction in the challenges of persuasion and the art of making people want things they didn't know they needed. But that day, I couldn't concentrate. Margaret's words kept returning to me, along with that strange look in her eyes. I found myself staring at my computer screen, watching the cursor blink mockingly at me as I struggled to focus on the Henderson automotive campaign that had been consuming my days. "Earth to David," called my assistant, Rebecca, from the doorway. "Your 2:00 is here." I shook myself back to the present, grateful for the distraction. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings, presentations, and the familiar rhythm of corporate life. It wasn't until I was driving home through the tree-lined streets of our neighborhood that the anxiety began to build again. Our house stood exactly as I'd left it that morning, a 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a wraparound porch that Margaret had insisted on when we'd bought it 18 years ago. She dreamed of sitting on that porch in rocking chairs when we were old, watching grandchildren play in the yard. The white picket fence she'd wanted completed the picture-perfect suburban dream we'd built together. But as I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something different. Margaret's car was in the garage, but there was another vehicle parked on the street in front of our house. A silver Honda Civic with a rainbow sticker on the back window. Something about that car made my stomach tighten, though I couldn't explain why. I found Margaret in the living room, sitting on our cream-colored sofa with a woman I didn't recognize. They were close together, their hands intertwined, and they looked up at me with identical expressions of gentle determination. "David," Margaret said, standing gracefully, "I'd like you to meet Jennifer." The woman who rose to greet me was striking in an understated way. She had short, dark hair with silver threads that caught the light, and eyes the color of storm clouds. She was probably around Margaret's age, with the kind of natural beauty that didn't need enhancement, and she wore simple jeans and a white button-down shirt that somehow looked elegant on her. "Hello, David," Jennifer said, extending her hand. "I've heard so much about you." Her voice was warm and genuine, and her handshake was firm. There was something familiar about her, something that tugged at the edges of my memory, but I couldn't place it. "Nice to meet you," I replied, my confusion evident. "I'm sorry, I thought you were just Margaret's book club friend." Margaret and Jennifer exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Margaret took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them together. "David, please sit down. We need to talk." I remained standing, my instincts telling me that whatever was coming, I needed to be ready to move, to run, to fight. "What's going on, Margaret?" "I'm in love with Jennifer," she said simply, her voice steady despite the magnitude of her words. "I've been in love with her for months now, and I can't pretend anymore. I can't live a lie." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my knees buckle slightly, and I had to reach out to steady myself against the back of our leather armchair. "What do you mean you're in love with her?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained strong. "I mean, I'm in love with her, David. Completely, utterly, desperately in love. In a way that I've never experienced before, not even with you. And she loves me too." Jennifer nodded, her own eyes glistening. "I know this is difficult, David. I never intended for this to happen. Neither of us did. But sometimes the heart wants what it wants, regardless of logic or timing, or the complications it creates." I stared at them both, my mind struggling to process what I was hearing. "You're having an affair." "No," Margaret said firmly. "We haven't been physical. We've been fighting these feelings for months, trying to ignore them, trying to pretend they would go away. But they haven't. They've only gotten stronger." "So what are you saying exactly?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Margaret's tears began to fall in earnest now. "I'm saying I want a divorce, David. I'm saying I can't stay married to you when I'm in love with someone else. It's not fair to you, and it's not fair to me. We all deserve to be happy, to be with someone who can love us completely." The room seemed to spin around me. I sank into the armchair, my legs no longer able to support me. 23 years, I whispered. 23 years of marriage, and you're throwing it all away for her?" "I'm not throwing anything away," Margaret said, kneeling beside my chair. "I'm choosing to be honest about who I am and what I need. I love you, David. I always will. But I'm not in love with you anymore. I haven't been for years, if I'm being completely honest." Her words were like knives, each one finding its target with surgical precision. I looked at Jennifer, who was watching us with a mixture of compassion and determination. "And you," I said to her, "you're okay with destroying a marriage?" Jennifer's expression didn't waver. "I'm not destroying anything that wasn't already broken, David. Margaret and I have spent months talking about this, about you, about your marriage. We've both lost sleep over it. But we can't help how we feel." "How long?" I asked. "How long have you been having these feelings?" Margaret and Jennifer looked at each other again, and I saw something pass between them that I'd never shared with anyone. A connection so deep and immediate that it was almost visible. "Since the first day we met," Margaret said quietly. 6 months ago, at the bookstore. We were both reaching for the same book, and our hands touched, and it was like electricity, like recognition. "Recognition," I repeated. Jennifer spoke up. "It felt like we'd known each other forever. Like we'd been waiting our whole lives to meet again." The word, again, hit me like a thunderbolt. I looked at Jennifer more carefully, studying her features with new attention. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile, the way she held her head when she was thinking. And suddenly, impossibly, I knew. Jenny, I breathed. Jenny Patterson. Her face went pale, and she nodded slowly. Hello, David. It's been a long time. The room began to spin in earnest now. Jenny Patterson. My first love. My first heartbreak. The girl who had consumed my thoughts and dreams throughout my senior year of high school, who had promised to love me forever and then disappeared from my life without explanation just weeks before graduation. I don't understand, I said, looking back and forth between them. How is this possible? How can you be here? How can you be with my wife? Jenny's voice was barely above a whisper. Life has a strange sense of humor, doesn't it? I moved back to Chicago last year after my divorce. I started going to the bookstore on Saturday mornings, and one day, Margaret was there. I recognized her immediately from the pictures you used to carry in your wallet. She was even more beautiful than I remembered. You recognized her? I asked, incredulous. I recognized her, but she didn't recognize me. I'd changed a lot since high school. Different name, different look, different life. But I remembered her face perfectly because you talked about her constantly during our junior year. You were already in love with her then, even though you were with me. The truth of her words hit me like a physical blow. I had been in love with Margaret even while I was dating Jenny. I'd tried to hide it, even from myself, but Jenny had seen through my facade. I never meant to hurt you, I said to Jenny. I was 17. I didn't know how to handle what I was feeling. I know, she said sadly, and I never meant to hurt you either. But when I saw Margaret that day in the bookstore, I knew I had to introduce myself. I told her I was an old friend of yours from high school, and she was delighted to meet me. She invited me to join her book club, and I couldn't resist. Margaret was crying openly now. I fell in love with her before I even knew who she was, David. Before I knew she was your Jenny. And by the time I figured it out, it was too late. I was already too deep. My Jenny, I repeated bitterly. She was never my Jenny. She made that clear 35 years ago when she disappeared without a word. Jenny flinched as if I'd slapped her. I didn't disappear without a word. I left you a letter. What letter? The letter I put in your locker the day before graduation. The letter where I explained everything, where I told you I was moving to California with my family, where I apologized for not being brave enough to tell you in person. I stared at her, my mind racing. I never got any letter. I put it in your locker, she insisted. Locker 247. I remember because it was the same as my birthday, February 4th, 1987. My locker was 274, I said quietly, not 247. The realization hit all three of us at the same time. Jenny had put her letter in the wrong locker. For 35 years, she'd thought I'd received her explanation and chosen not to respond. For 35 years, I'd thought she'd abandoned me without a word. Oh God, Jenny whispered, covering her face with her hands. All these years, I thought you hated me. I thought you'd decided you didn't want to see me anymore. I looked for you, I said, my voice breaking. I called your house, but it was disconnected. I drove to your house, but it was empty. I even went to the school office to try to find out where you'd gone, but they wouldn't tell me anything. I thought you'd decided I wasn't worth saying goodbye to. The three of us sat in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of the misunderstanding that had shaped all our lives. If Jenny had put her letter in the right locker, if I'd known she was moving, if we'd had the chance to say goodbye properly, how different would our lives have been? It doesn't matter now, Margaret said finally. What matters is what we do from here. She was right, of course. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was still unwritten. I looked at my wife, the woman I'd loved for over half my life, and saw that she was already gone. Not physically, but emotionally. She was sitting right beside me, but her heart was across the room with Jenny Patterson. So what happens now? I asked. Margaret reached for my hand. Now we figure out how to do this with as much love and respect as possible. We divide our assets. We tell our families. We find a way to move forward that honors what we've meant to each other. And you? I asked Jenny. What do you want out of this? Jenny looked at me with eyes that held 3 decades of regret and longing. I want to love Margaret the way she deserves to be loved. I want to make up for lost time. And I want your forgiveness, David. I want us to find a way to be okay with each other. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation. My wife was leaving me for my first love, the woman who had shaped my understanding of heartbreak and loss. It was like a cosmic joke, the kind of plot twist that would seem too contrived for fiction. I need time, I said finally. I need time to process this, to figure out how I feel, to decide what I want to do next. Of course, Margaret said. Take all the time you need. I'll stay at Jennifer's place until we can figure out the living arrangements. You're moving in with her? I asked. Eventually, yes. But not right away. We want to do this right, David. We want to be respectful of the process, of your feelings, of the fact that we're dismantling something that took decades to build. I looked around our living room, at the furniture we'd chosen together, the photographs of our life together, the books on our shelves that represented shared evenings and discussions. Everything looked the same, but nothing would ever be the same again. I should go, Jenny said, standing up. This is between you and Margaret now. I'll wait for you at home, she said to Margaret, and the casual intimacy of the word home was like another knife to my heart. Margaret walked Jenny to the door, and I watched them embrace with a tenderness that took my breath away. They held each other like they were precious, like they were afraid one of them might disappear if they let go. I'd never seen Margaret look at anyone that way, not even me. When Jenny was gone, Margaret came back to the living room and sat across from me. We looked at each other in silence for a long moment, 2 people who had shared a life and were now trying to figure out how to share a divorce. I'm sorry, she said finally. I'm so sorry it happened this way. I'm sorry I fell in love with someone else. I'm sorry that someone else was Jenny. I'm sorry for all of it. Are you? I asked. Are you really sorry? Or are you just sorry that it's messy? Margaret considered the question carefully. I'm sorry that it's messy. I'm sorry that you're hurt. I'm sorry that our marriage is ending. But I'm not sorry that I fell in love with her, David. I can't be sorry for the first time in my life that I felt completely, utterly alive. Her honesty was brutal and beautiful at the same time. I'd always loved Margaret's directness, her refusal to sugarcoat difficult truths. Now that same quality was being used to dismantle our marriage. When did you know? I asked. When did you know you were in love with her? Margaret smiled through her tears. The 3rd time we met for coffee. She was telling me about a book she'd read, and she got so animated, so passionate about the story and the characters. She was gesturing with her hands and her eyes were sparkling, and I suddenly thought, I could watch her talk about books for the rest of my life. And then I realized what that meant, and I was terrified. And when did you know you weren't in love with me anymore? The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. Margaret looked down at her hands, gathering her courage. I think I've known for years, David. I think we both have. We've been going through the motions, being good partners, good companions, good roommates. But the spark, the passion, the deep connection, it's been gone for a long time. She was right, and I knew it. Our marriage had become comfortable, predictable, safe. We'd fallen into patterns and routines that served us well but didn't inspire us. We were like 2 actors who'd been playing the same roles for so long that we'd forgotten who we were underneath the performance. So what do we do now? I asked. Now we figure out how to be kind to each other while we untangle 23 years of shared life. We figure out how to tell our families, how to divide our assets, how to maintain our friendships. We figure out how to love each other in a different way. Over the next several weeks, Margaret and I began the complex process of dismantling our marriage. We met with lawyers, divided our possessions, and had countless difficult conversations. Throughout it all, we tried to maintain the respect and affection that had always been the foundation of our relationship. I learned that Margaret had been questioning her sexuality for years, wondering if her lack of passion in our marriage was due to something deeper than simple compatibility issues. Meeting Jenny had been like a key turning in a lock, opening a door to a part of herself she'd never fully acknowledged. I don't think I'm gay, she told me one evening as we sat in our kitchen, sorting through financial documents. I think I'm just Jenny sexual. I think she's my person, my soulmate, and it doesn't matter that she's a woman. What matters is that she's her. I found myself strangely comforted by this explanation. It wasn't that Margaret preferred women to men. It was that she preferred Jenny to everyone else in the world. It wasn't a rejection of me as a man. It was a recognition of Jenny as Margaret's perfect match. But understanding didn't make the pain any easier to bear. I was losing my wife, my life partner, my best friend. I was starting over at 52, trying to figure out who I was without Margaret by my side. The hardest part was telling our families. Margaret's parents, who were in their 80s, struggled to understand how their daughter could leave a stable marriage for a woman. My parents, who had always adored Margaret, were devastated by the news of our divorce. "I don't understand," my mother said during one of our phone calls. "Margaret seemed so happy. You both seemed so happy." "We were happy, Mom," I replied. "We were comfortable, but sometimes comfortable isn't enough." Our friends were divided in their reactions. Some supported Margaret's decision to follow her heart, while others felt she should have honored her marriage vows regardless of her feelings. The book club, predictably, fell apart as members chose sides. Throughout it all, Jenny maintained a respectful distance from me. She didn't try to justify her actions or convince me to forgive her. She simply loved Margaret openly and honestly, and she waited for me to find my own way to acceptance. It was during one of my late-night walks through our neighborhood that I finally began to understand what was happening to me. I was grieving, of course, but I was also discovering something unexpected. I was proud of Margaret. She had found the courage to be honest about who she was and what she needed, even though it meant destroying the life we'd built together. She had chosen truth over comfort, authenticity over security, and slowly, gradually, I began to find my own courage. I started therapy to work through my feelings about the divorce and my complicated history with Jenny. I began to explore who I was outside of my marriage, what I wanted from life, what kind of person I wanted to become. 6 months after Margaret moved out, I ran into Jenny at the grocery store. We stood there in the produce section, surrounded by apples and oranges, looking at each other with 35 years of history between us. "How are you doing?" she asked gently. "I'm okay," I said, and I was surprised to realize it was true. "I'm figuring things out. I want you to know," she said, "that I think about you every day. I think about what happened between us, what didn't happen, what might have been. I carry you with me, David. I always have." Her words were like a healing balm on a wound I'd carried for decades. "I think about you too," I admitted. "I think about what it might have been like if we'd had the chance to say goodbye properly. If we'd had closure. Do you think we can have closure now?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. "I think we can have something better than closure. I think we can have forgiveness. I think we can have peace." Jenny's eyes filled with tears. "I'd like that very much." We talked for 20 minutes there in the produce section, sharing stories about our lives, our marriages, our children. Jenny had been married for 15 years to a man who never fully understood her, and she'd finally found the courage to leave him shortly before meeting Margaret. She'd been searching for herself, for her authentic life, just as Margaret had been. "I'm happy for you," I told her as we prepared to part ways. "I'm happy that you found each other. I'm happy that you're both finally living your truth." "Are you really?" she asked. "I'm really trying to be," I said. "And I think that's a start." The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in October, exactly 1 year after Margaret had first told me she was in love with Jenny. We met at the courthouse, signed the papers, and walked out into the crisp autumn air as two people who had once been married and were now simply two people who had shared a life. "How do you feel?" Margaret asked as we stood on the courthouse steps. "Free," I said, and I meant it. "Sad, but free. How about you?" "Grateful," she replied. "Grateful for 23 years of marriage. Grateful for the person you helped me become. Grateful for the chance to start over." We hugged goodbye, and I watched her walk away toward Jenny's car. They drove off together, two women in love, beginning their new life together. I stood there for a long time, watching the traffic flow past, feeling the weight of my old life lifting from my shoulders. That night, I called my sister and told her about the divorce being final. She'd been my strongest supporter throughout the process, helping me navigate the emotional and practical challenges of starting over. "So what now?" she asked. "What's next for David Mitchell?" "I don't know," I admitted. And for the first time in my life, that feels like an adventure instead of a problem. I was 53 years old, single for the first time in over 2 decades, and I had no idea what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. The uncertainty should have been terrifying, but instead it felt like possibility. I could travel, change careers, learn new skills, meet new people. I could figure out who I was when I wasn't defined by my relationship to someone else. 6 months later, I was having dinner with a colleague when she mentioned that her sister was recently divorced and looking to meet new people. "You should meet her," she said. "I think you'd like each other." "I'm not sure I'm ready for that," I replied. "You don't have to be ready," she said. "You just have to be open." Her words stayed with me for weeks. Was I open? Was I ready to risk my heart again? To trust someone new? To build something from scratch? I thought about Margaret and Jenny, about the courage it had taken for them to be honest about their feelings, to dismantle the safe and comfortable in pursuit of the authentic and passionate. If they could be that brave, maybe I could too. The woman I eventually met was named Sarah, and she was nothing like Margaret. She was a teacher, divorced for 3 years, with 2 teenage children and a laugh that could fill a room. She was kind and funny and completely unimpressed by my advertising career. She challenged me to think differently, to see the world through fresh eyes, to remember what it felt like to be excited about the future. "What do you want?" she asked me one evening, as we sat on her back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "I want to be happy," I said. "I want to be authentic. I want to love someone completely and be loved completely in return." "That's a good start," she said, taking my hand. "That's a very good start." As I write this, it's been 3 years since Margaret told me she was in love with Jenny Patterson. Margaret and Jenny are thriving in their life together, having found in each other the deep connection they'd both been searching for. They travel together, cook together, read together, and love each other with the kind of passion that radiates from them like heat from a fire. I'm happy for them. I'm genuinely, completely happy for them. Because I've learned that love isn't a zero-sum game. Margaret's happiness doesn't diminish mine. Jenny's joy doesn't cancel out my own. We can all be happy, just in different ways, with different people, in different configurations. Sarah and I are taking things slowly, building something real and sustainable. We're not trying to recapture the intensity of first love or the comfort of long marriage. We're creating something new, something that honors who we are now, at this stage of our lives, with all our experience and wisdom and scars. Sometimes I think about the letter that never reached me, the misunderstanding that shaped 3 decades of our lives. I wonder what would have happened if Jenny and I had been able to say goodbye properly, if we'd had closure before we moved on to other relationships. Would I have married Margaret? Would Jenny have found her way to Chicago? Would any of us have ended up where we are now? But I've learned that asking, "What if?" is a dangerous game. The past is fixed, immutable, set in stone. The future is fluid, changeable, full of possibility. I can't change the fact that Jenny broke my heart when I was 17, or that Margaret broke my heart when I was 52. But I can choose how I respond to those breaks, how I let them shape me, how I use them to become a better, more compassionate, more authentic version of myself. The heart is a remarkable organ. It can be broken and heal stronger than before. It can hold multiple truths simultaneously, loving and letting go, grieving and celebrating, remembering and forgiving. It can expand to accommodate new loves without diminishing old ones. It can learn to trust again, to risk again, to hope again. I loved Margaret for 23 years, and I will always love her. She was my partner, my companion, my friend. She helped me become the man I am today, and I hope I did the same for her. Our marriage may have ended, but our love simply transformed into something different, something that honors what we shared while acknowledging what we needed to find elsewhere. I loved Jenny Patterson when I was 17, and in a way, I love her still. She was my first taste of heartbreak, my first lesson in the complexity of human relationships, my first understanding that love doesn't always last forever. She taught me that people can leave, that promises can be broken, that life can change in an instant. These were hard lessons, but they were necessary ones. And now I love Sarah, differently than I loved Margaret, differently than I loved Jenny. I love her with the wisdom that comes from experience, the gratitude that comes from second chances, the appreciation that comes from understanding how rare and precious it is to find someone who sees you clearly and loves you anyway. The story of my marriage ending isn't really about betrayal or loss, or the cruel tricks that fate can play. It's about the courage to be honest, the strength to change course, the wisdom to recognize that love comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone go. It's about the realization that life is long and complicated and full of surprises, and that the people who matter most to us can show up in unexpected ways at unexpected times. It's about the understanding that happiness isn't a destination, but a choice, not a guarantee, but a practice, not something that happens to us, but something we create for ourselves. Margaret found her happiness with Jenny, and I found my peace with that truth. Jenny found her redemption with Margaret, and I found my forgiveness in their joy. And I'm still finding my happiness one day at a time, one choice at a time, one love at a time. The heart wants what it wants, as Jenny said that first evening in our living room. But the heart also learns, grows, adapts, and heals. It learns to want different things, better things, truer things. It learns to love more wisely, more deeply, more authentically. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, it learns to love again. As I finish writing this story, I'm sitting in Sarah's kitchen, watching her make breakfast for her children. She's humming the same song Margaret used to hum, and for a moment, I'm struck by the strange symmetry of it all. But then Sarah turns and smiles at me, and I see not an echo of my past, but a promise of my future. The heart is resilient. The heart is brave. The heart is capable of infinite love, infinite forgiveness, infinite hope. And that, I think, is the most beautiful truth of all.